Hello, book lovers, and welcome to the 128th episode of Authors Love Bookstores from a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, and I am delighted to be back here with you today. Every week, I, along with my partner and fellow writer, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence, crisscross North America and beyond, visiting independent bookstores and the authors who love them. And this week, we could not be happier than to be in Indianapolis, Indiana, with Kat Cardwell, Bookstore Program Director at Indy Reads. Kat, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And the author who's bringing us together is none other than our very own Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hank, welcome to the program.
Thank you. This is just great. It's really an honor, and I love seeing you, Kat.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you.
For those who don't know, and Hank is truly a writer who needs no introduction, but I will do one anyway. Hank Phillippi Ryan is the USA Today bestselling author of 14 psychological thrillers. She has won 5 Anthony Awards, the Mary Higgins Clark Award, and is the only author to win the Agatha Award in 4 categories: Best First, Best Novel, Best Short Story, and Best Nonfiction. She is also on-air investigative reporter for WHDH-TV Boston and has 37 Emmys. In addition to all this, Hank is a colleague at A Mighty Blaze and hosts Crime Time on air. Her latest, The House Guest, is called Binge-Worthy by Library Journal, and I can tell you from personal experience that it absolutely is. Hank, congratulations on The House Guest.
Thank you. It's very exciting.
It's a great book. And, Hank, I'm going to turn to you first with our first question. Last week, I was just walking along a street in Newton, Massachusetts, minding my own business, and somebody almost ran me over. A guy sort of almost sideswiped me on the sidewalk. He couldn't see because he was carrying a huge pile of books, and it kind of obstructed his vision. And I'm one of these people that when I see somebody with books in public, I have to know what the book is, like on a bus or a plane. I have to know what people are reading. So I kind of like peeked at this guy, and he was holding like 30 or 40 copies of The House Guest, all piled up in his arms past his face. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I followed him. It's like a Hank Phillippi Ryan book. I followed him. And of course, as you might guess, he was going into Newtonville Books, where you were speaking that night. You were having an event that night at one of the fabulous independent bookstores here in the Boston area. Hank, you are an absolute fixture in the independent bookstore community in and around Boston. I see you at events. You're so generous with your time. Audiences love you. I wonder if you would just say a little bit about independent bookstores and what they mean to you, both in the literary community and in your career as a writer.
First, I'm envisioning that picture of the guy with the 32 copies of The House Guest, which is amazing. I couldn't figure out whether it was a better story that he was going into the store with the book or coming out of the store.
Right.
Either one is a good story. I was thinking about talking with you, and I grew up in Indianapolis, and my family's house was full of books. And when I thought about talking to you, I began to wonder, where did those books come from? I mean, this was in the 1950s in Indianapolis. And I was sort of dredging my brain to figure out, was there a bookstore? Where did my parents get those books? I mean, I remember sneaking Marjorie Morningstar from my parents' shelves, thinking there would be, the good parts that I could underline. I loved it. I remember seeing Kurt Vonnegut on their shelves. I remember reading the Edward Eager books, but the young adult mysteries, which I still love. But where did they come from? I just don't know. I mean, certainly the library, but the ones that my parents owned, I don't know. I don't know where they came from. So the idea of now, I didn't start writing fiction until I was 55, which was 17 years ago. Now we have independent bookstores. Now we know where to go to get a book. And now we know where to go to get not only a book, but the perfect book from someone who knows about books, from someone who can say, what do you like? And they just give you this raft of knowledgeable, interested, connected information. The idea of being able to go to an independent bookstore and ask for advice and find something you love and be given something you love is a connection that is really essentially new in my life since I started being a writer. So when as an author, I'll tell you this very, very quickly. As an author, and you know this, when you walk into an independent bookstore and there's your book on the table or on the shelf and it says staff pick, the house guest, how can you not burst into tears? So I am endlessly grateful every day for the knowledge and expertise and generosity of bookstores and how much every single one of them changes the world. Indy Reads is at the pinnacle of that in changing people's lives. And it's just so impressed and in awe of that.
Thank you for that. And Kat, I wonder if you would just say a bit about Indy Reads and the the wider mission of your organization as well as the bookstore.
Yeah, absolutely. So Indy Reads as an organization has been around since the 80s, but we've recently moved into our new Fountain Square location here. And so really our mission is like literacy for all. So we're looking at high school equivalency classes, English language learner classes, certain certifications that we provide, and that's all for free for our students because we are a nonprofit. And also about 10 years ago, we opened then a bookstore as well, because kind of like what you were saying, Hank, about having those independent stores and having those resources in the community is just part of literacy for everyone. So our bookstore that is here that I'm here in charge of, we're predominantly used that the community donates books to us and we're able to sell those, and all proceeds then go to our student classes. We do have some new books. Obviously we want to keep, some things that are just coming out and, highlighting those along with other local authors. And then we also then provide programming in the store then for all generations, looking at the whole family, things that they can come to here. So we definitely have a fun community space in addition to our classroom settings.
That's fantastic. And, I want to remind our audience that we are here to support independent bookstores, and especially this week, Indy Reads. We're going to be dropping links in the chat for you to head to Indy Reads online and pick up a book. Ideally, this book, The House Guest, but also many others. Drop your questions and comments in the chat. We will get to as many as we can. And Hank, lots of people in the audience who are cheering on The House Guest and saying that they love it. But I wonder if you would, for those who might not know about it, give us an elevator pitch and just tell us a little bit about your new book.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to commend Kat again, and I know you do too, Joe, is that what you're doing is cultivating new bookstore customers. You're cultivating new readers. And so talk about keeping the community going. You're the ones who are providing new readers, and that is just great for all of us who are authors. You're making a new audience for us, and that's really nice. Thank you. The House Guest is my 14th novel, and I have to say that it just went into a second printing after 6 days on sale, not 6 weeks on sale, but 6 days on sale. So Kat, I know you have first editions, and that is very nice that you snagged those. The House Guest is a novel of suspense, psychological suspense. It's sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise meets Strangers on a Train, if you can imagine that juxtaposition. It stars Alyssa McAllen. When we meet Alyssa McAllen, she is unhappy, she is heartbroken, she is devastated, and she is terrified because the man, her husband, she's been married for 8 years to a man she loves and who she thought loved her. And one day, inexplicably, and without explanation or warning, he walks out, and she is devastated, lonely, and terrified because it seems like her husband, Bill McAllen, who is powerful and affluent and pretty manipulative, seems to be suddenly trying to ruin her life. He's taken all their friends. He's threatened to take their house. He's threatened to take all of her money and leave her alone. She cannot figure this out. And when the FBI shows up at her door, Alyssa realizes that she really needs a friend. And then she gets one, a brand new seductive friend named Bree Lawrence. And Bree seems to be running from a dangerous person of her own. And soon Bree makes a beguiling offer, which is maybe they can solve each other's problems. So it's two smart women facing off in a high-stakes psychological cat and mouse game to prove their truth about a devastating betrayal. But which woman is the cat and which woman is the mouse? And that is the house guest.
Oh, so good. What a great pitch. And it is every bit as good as that. And as the review says, it is indeed binge worthy. I read it in, more or less one sitting. And it's fabulous. Hank, in another interview, I was very surprised when I read that you actually don't know how your books end when you begin them. I mean, it's so twisty. It's such a great puzzle, and it astounded me that you just kind of find your way through it to the end. I'd always assumed that you were somebody who sort of, carefully put all the pieces out before you assembled them. Have you tried to be more of a outliner and a plotter, or I mean, how does it work inside of your brain?
Have you been talking to my editor? Because my editor constantly says, can't you just send me an outline? And my answer to her is no, because I how do I know what happens until it really happens? And in my writer brain, it doesn't happen until I write the story. So I think if I analyzed it, it's sort of, after being a television reporter for 43 years, which I have, when I do television stories, I'm out looking for the answers. I have an idea, I have a theory, I have a what if kind of question. I have something that I'm looking for the answer to. And I follow clues and track down leads and do research and look at documents and create the story. I'm in search of the story. And I'm not afraid that I don't know the end of a news story, because how could I? If I knew the ending, it wouldn't be new. So I think that sort of translates into how my brain works in writing fiction, that I'm in search of the story. So I start with a good idea. I type the words chapter 1 and I say, okay, let's see what happens. Now that's a tightrope. It's a little bit scary because it's sort of I type chapter 1 and I think, okay, 99,000 words to go. And I don't know what they're going to be, but I know a good story when I hear one. And I have the weird combination of confidence and naivete that I think a writer has to have, to think, you know what, I think I can write a good story. I know I can. Let's just see what happens. So no, when people say, wow, the house guest really surprised me, the twists and the in the middle and the twists in the middle of the middle and the twists in the middle of the end and the twist in the end and the twist after the end, I say, yeah, wasn't that a surprise? Who would have thought? Because it surprises me every time. Talk about a surprise ending. I surprise myself every time. And that is the magic. That is what Sue Grafton used to call the magic of writing, that we are creating a real story in a real world. And that's why I don't need to have an outline of it. I don't, we don't have an outline of our lives. And I think writing a novel is parallel to that.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's completely fascinating. That's great. And we've posted in the comments below our interview a link to a recent profile of you in Boston Magazine where you mention this process, although not in as much depth. You also in that interview have what's become one of my favorite quotes about writing, where you say, writing is a job, and in any job you've got to make the boss happy, and I'm the boss. And I'm paraphrasing it. You said it better, but it seems like you're a tough boss. You're a boss that demands 1,000 words a day. But what is it that drives you, Hank, at this point? I mean, to keep on going. I mean, 14 novels, all of these awards. Is it just that you sense that there are more stories out there that you need to discover?
When I sit at this desk and am working on my novels, I don't think of it that way. On a good writing day, it's just so much fun to see how good a story I can create. Again, back to being a reporter. The highest accolade that someone can give a reporter is, when you say, "Oh, that was a good story." That, that feeling, that those shivers that you get when you have a good story. And I am really connected to that. I love the idea of being able to come up with an interesting, intriguing, compelling story. I mean, I don't want you to turn the channel when my stories are on TV. And I want you to miss your stop on the subway when you're reading my novels. That the idea of being a storyteller, I think that's what I love. There's entertainment and enlightenment and education. There's surprises and there's humanity in it. And there's searching for the truth. As a reporter and as a crime fiction author, I want the good guys to win and the bad guys to get what's coming to them. And in the end, I want some justice and I want to change the world a little bit. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm writing a story. And I hope that that's never ending.
I love that. That's fascinating. Kat, I want to come back to you. We were chatting before we came on air about Hank's origins in Indiana, and I'm going to ask her a bit more about that a little bit later on. But Kat, I wonder if you would just tell us a little bit about the Indianapolis book scene, your readership out there, what it is like to be working in the literacy space, in the book selling space in Indianapolis. What's been your experience?
Sure. It's funny when Hank, you were mentioning about trying to figure out where the books came from in your house. Like even me thinking back in my own, I think the only thing nearby was a Borders back in the day for myself. There was, and it almost felt like an independent for myself growing up because there wasn't a lot of other places besides the library to go and get books. But now I definitely see like an insurgence of with ourselves. There's we have a few used places around town. We've got some new ones popping up. So it's nice to see it kind of coming back and not not just the desert of books that I felt like we had for a little bit. Like we've got like a new bookstores opening up on Mass Ave, which is downtown. We've got Ujamaa, a community bookstore that focuses on a certain community over a kind of in our international marketplace area of Indianapolis. So that's exciting to see. And our location is a library branch that was closed. So it was lovely that we were able to come in and fill that here in Fountain Square, as it's a neighborhood that's starting to grow even more as well. So I see, it's lovely to see generations of people bringing in their children or people coming in or kids coming in after school is out to come in and take a look and browse. And the thing that is really lovely about being an independent is that you have, some of that choices to find those, fun little quirks and books that maybe you wouldn't find or someone might not know about, and to be able to, support local authors and give them a place to be seen. So yeah, that's been really lovely to see as we open back up after being closed with the pandemic.
Yeah, and there's this lovely piece on the Indy Reads website where, it talks about the mission and says, what does Indy Reads do? We provide a key to a locked door. We provide a key to the locked door for people who don't have the language or literacy skills to go through it. And I think that's, it's such a lovely image. In my day job, I'm a psychologist and I specialize in learning disabilities. And so many of the people I work with are dyslexic. And, I see all the time people who can't read or can't break the code to read experience so much shame and frustration. And it's such not just a logistical barrier, but a psychological burden. Yeah. And I think it must just be so satisfying to be able to play a role in helping people to kind of open that door.
Yeah, and I think as my part, and as I speak more with the community and our volunteers and things, people are very excited about being able to come in and read a book. And I think when we, give them a list of, what things people are having trouble doing in their everyday life, people kind of forget how much reading is important in regards to reading nutrition labels on, food in the grocery store, understanding, homework that's coming home with a kid or instructions from school. There's so many avenues that literacy affects, not only reading books, which is lovely, but just your day-to-day being able to, be a part of the community. So when you were mentioning the unlocking, you can kind of see behind me, we have a board where we have our donors are part of our literacy league. And so if they donate $5 a month or more, they can come in and get a free used book every month. And it's part of unlocking the potential of our students. And so then we like to honor them as well.
That's fantastic. And Kat, I know from chatting with you earlier that you've not always been in the literacy space, that you have a sort of interesting background. What is it? I wonder if you tell us a bit about that, and in particular, what it has been like for you to move into the independent bookselling role, and sort of what might have been surprising for you about that.
Sure. I kind of joked, even with someone earlier today, my background is kind of all melded, I feel like, to this point. Previously, I studied political science, English literature, and actually grad work in Shakespeare, and working for a congressman. I did a little bit of some other nonprofit works here in town with some theaters. And then even my husband and a friend and I, we created a not-for-profit theater company for a little while in Indianapolis that was bringing adaptations of Shakespeare to students and to the community, especially since Shakespeare is still part of the curriculum. A lot of times, if you don't get to see it on its feet, sometimes it can be hard to interpret or read. So we would do that. And I actually was before working here, I was living in the UK with my husband and was working for Blackwell's. If any book lovers out there know of Blackwell's, it's a wonderful bookshop in Oxford. And so I'd gotten to have my hand in real book selling. And what I mean by that is actually doing the book buying myself. So not having a central, a central buyer who sends everything to you like some larger stores do. I actually was being able to, have a section and look at those titles and meet with those reps and talk to different authors and, decide what we want to do. So when this role, kind of new role formed with this bookstore program director here at Indy Reads, I was able to just kind of combine everything I loved about, working with the community from my political background and then just my love of books. And then just recently working at Blackwell's, it just, worked together, which was really great.
That's fabulous. Blackwell's is fantastic. That is peak book experience. My son's at Oxford and we've had a chance to spend time there, and it's just a fabulous place. Hank, you in a couple of different venues, interviews and live appearances and so forth, have talked a little bit about your childhood in Indiana, going to your local library, taking out Nancy Drew books, having some of your early exposure to mystery. You describe yourself, you and your sister riding ponies to the library and filling saddlebags with Nancy Drew and then riding home to read in the barn, which strikes me as, I guess, sort of, I'm from New Jersey, so like we didn't have ponies. Like it seems incredibly picturesque. Tell us more about it. Tell us what it was like. Can you just paint a little bit more of that picture for us?
When Karen Slaughter heard the story of my childhood, she was laughing and she said, "What were you, Little House on the Prairie?" She thought it was just so odd sounding. No, we grew up in really rural Indiana, in Zionsville, Indiana. And back then, I mean, we're talking about the 50s. It was so rural that you couldn't see another house from our house. And my sister and I used to ride our ponies, Cadet and Sable, were their very clever names. Used to ride Cadet and Sable to the library and fill up the saddlebags with books. We got to take 10 at a time. And we would read up in the hayloft of the barn behind our house. I mean, I was the most bookish, nerdy, lonely, little, unhappy girl you could ever possibly imagine. My only friends were friends in books, and that's where I lived. I loved Nancy Drew. I mean, you all read Nancy Drew, the Clue in the Old Clock and the Clue in the Diary, which I thought was Clue in the Dairy for a long time, and I just couldn't figure that out. And then I met Sherlock Holmes. And I remember just disappearing into the hayloft reading Sherlock Holmes. And I do think storytelling began to sink in. I mean, Nancy was smart and she was competent and she could solve problems and she was cool. And then she had a roadster and she seemed very grown up, but she seemed to have some power and some agency. And I think that's what, even though I didn't know those words, what drew me to her. But Sherlock Holmes, now he was brilliant, and Arthur Conan Doyle was writing these stories that had clues and characterization, and I read so many of them that I felt the music of the story, the rhythm of how he was writing, and I loved trying to solve the mysteries before Watson did. And then I remember so clearly reading Murder on the Orient Express, and I think I was 12. I mean, I'm making this up, but I bet it was 12. And I remember closing that book and just thinking, holy cow, how did she do that? How did she come up with that ending, which is what we say now, it's surprising but inevitable. And I should have seen that. I should have seen that coming, but we never do because she was such a genius. And I think that those were the moments when I thought, maybe I want to be a mystery writer. Maybe I want to be a mystery writer. But the thing that changed me was that I thought maybe it would be better, more fun, more rewarding to be a detective, to be the person who solved the mysteries rather than the person who wrote about the person who solved the mysteries. And as I became an investigative reporter after a series of events, and now as a crime fiction author, I get to be both. I get to write about the detectives and I get to be the detective as an investigative reporter. So just as Kat was saying, the sort of culmination of all the things that happened in our lives turn out to be not just important for what we're doing at the time, but as part of the puzzle pieces of how our lives are going to evolve. And it's absolutely so surprising. I mean, Kat, I worked on Capitol Hill for a congressman from Texas and then Senator Kennedy from Massachusetts when I still was from Indiana. I worked in several political campaigns. I majored in Shakespeare in college. I worked for Rolling Stone magazine. I mean, all those things, our lives are so similar that it's really kind of weirdly chilling how we've come together here on Authors Love Bookstores with Joe. Out of nowhere, the two of us come together with such interestingly connected histories.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Hank, I do have a question for you about that history and how it would apply to the house guest. Before I get to that, Kat, quick question from a viewer. Randy is watching from Westchester County, but would love to support Indianapolis bookstores with his online purchases. He knows he can buy online from Indy Reads. If you have any tips on independent bookstores in Indiana that you would want him to go to and to pick up some books, and if you need to think about it for a few moments, then circle back. But we would love to hear it because Randy wants to throw some of his book money in the Indiana direction.
Yeah. Obviously, of course. It's funny when you said Zionsville. I believe it's Black Dog Books, I think, is now a bookstore in Zionsville.
Yes.
So you're talking about when it's Zionsville has definitely grown in the past few years, and I think they actually have their own rare book bookstore. I have not made it up.
I mean, when I lived outside of Zionsville, I honestly think, and I don't think I'm imagining this, I honestly think there was a hitching post in front of the drugstore. I honestly think that's true. So Zionsville has gotten all chic and literary in the years since I've been gone. No question about it.
Indianapolis grows and the surrounding areas. That's one. I actually live in a community called Irvington, which is just east of here, not too far. And so they've got a fun Irvington books and vinyl. So they've got used vinyl and books, and they do some lovely missions. I think they even have a community garden that they cultivate and have as a pantry for people as well as that. I just love the people that are at the bookstore. Always usually people are very connected in the greater good of the community, and so those are a couple that I would recommend.
Great tips. We're putting links into the chat, so anybody in the audience now or in future time can head over and pick up some great books, including The House Guest. Hank, one thought that I had, as you're talking about your background from rural Indiana to Washington, D.C., working for Senator Kennedy, coming to Massachusetts, doing investigative report for all these years. Um, you know, One thing that struck me in reading this book and reading The House Guest was your, I thought, sort of tremendous attunement to social class. The people in this book, and I kind of want to be careful about spoilers here, but the people in this book, some of them start out wealthy. It's set in Weston, Massachusetts, near here, which is a very affluent town. But people are at risk of being knocked out of their social position, literally losing the country club membership or going to lunch at the country club and sort of being looked at kind of side eye. Other people are unexpectedly coming into money, and that is, or maybe coming into money, and that's changing their lives in unexpected ways. Some of the central, I guess I want to say, drama of the book has to do with machinations around financial donations and charitable donations. You just seem so attuned to money and to class and to what it means to have your status threatened, to what it means to move around in that regard. Does your background moving across all these different environments, did that give you kind of a barometer for that type of thing that you're using now as a writer?
I just love listening to you. I could just listen to you talk about this all day. There's nothing more fun for an author, besides going into an independent bookstore and seeing your book on the front table, than hearing somebody who really gets the book. It's a psychological thriller, it's a page turner, it's a murder mystery, all those kinds of things. But what you're talking about, that insider, outsider, the accepted person, the not accepted person, the person who knows the rules and who doesn't know the rules, and how often is that under the umbrella of money? How often does money make the difference about who you are? I was talking about my pitiful junior high, we called it junior high, not middle school, junior high days, when I was so on the outside. And I know what it feels to be the little guy. They voted me in junior high, when they have best dressed, most likely to succeed, those kinds of things. They voted me most individual. And I know that sounds cool now, but when you're 14 and you just want to be like everybody else, it was terrible. It was terrible. And they put my picture in the school paper upside down to show how weird I was. And they branded me an outsider. I know how it feels to be the weird one, the misfit on the outside, the one who doesn't fit in. And I think that where that class system that you're talking about so eloquently comes in is how it feels to be on the outside wanting to be in. And what is it that keeps us out? Is it some sort of caste system of society? Does it have to do with money? Does it have to do with family? Does it have to do with power? Does it have to do with access? Does it have to do with manipulation and gaslighting and deception? All of those things put a line between people. And I love exploring that. And every one of my books is about what someone wants and how far they'll go to get it, for better or for worse. And I do think that I'm making this broad statement here that we all just want to be loved and accepted and feel safe and secure. And that's, when you put money in that, and you put access in that, that can be really heartbreaking and really poignant and really powerful and really destructive. And that is sort of one of the underlying themes of The House Guest. Absolutely. You're so right about that.
Yeah, and it comes through. I love that. And it comes through so clearly. And I think it's something that really sort of, House Guest, it's a great mystery. It's a great sort of suspense novel. Like, you want to get to the last page, you want to know the secret, but also, I think it's pieces like what you're talking about that just make it, a tremendous book, because I think it is so psychologically insightful in terms of what is it like for somebody to feel outside, to feel like their status is threatened, to feel like their place in the hierarchy is changing, and it's just fascinating.
I mean, I think the thing about Alyssa in the book quickly, and I don't mean to interrupt, but that's what I just did.
No.
The thing about Alyssa is, and one of the things I wanted to illustrate in the book is that sometimes when we're put in a state of disequilibrium, when the rug is pulled out from under us, when everything we thought we could rely on is taken from us, like it is for Alyssa on page 1, how do we get back who we are? How do we regain our power? How do we realize that we are valuable without everybody else's trappings? That what we are is ourselves, and that's important. So my goal in the book was for Alyssa to attempt to get her power back and to realize that that would be a journey, and that's one of the undercurrents of the book as well. Is empowerment, our own empowerment. And I could just say, because this whole interview this afternoon is so connected, that's what Kat's doing at the bookstore too, is giving people this key to empowering themselves by becoming a reader and giving them access to that. It's the same kind of thing, in and out, and reading puts you in.
Yeah,
So well said.
That's something that, like, growing up, you hear knowledge is power. Like, that was told, I heard it over and over again as a kid, knowledge is power. But if that's the case, like, literacy is freedom. Like, you have to be able to gain that knowledge and understand it for yourself. So for us, to me, I'm like, there's a step before knowledge, and it's literacy. And that's really what we're all about providing here.
So well said. That's so well said. Hank, a few of your readers are dropping some questions. I'm just going to pop them up on the screen just to give people a chance. I don't want to monopolize you. So a few questions coming in from readers that I want to have a chance to put up while we still have time. Who has been your hardest character to write about, and why?
Well, Alicia, that's really a difficult question. The characters evolve as the story writes, so I kind of don't think of it that way. I ask myself, what do they want? As I said before, what does this person want, and how far will they go to get it? And as they make those decisions, they reveal their personality and their character to me as they're deciding whether they make the selfish choice or the generous choice, the illegal choice or the benevolent choice. That's how the characters reveal themselves to me. So, I always think about what Sue Grafton said about Kinsey Malone. And she would say that Kinsey revealed herself to Sue the more Sue wrote about her. So the more I progress in writing my novel, the more the characters reveal themselves to me. And then when I finish my first draft and I realize who they are and why they're there and why they did what they did, then I go back in a second edit, Leisha, and make them be more who they turned out to be. So I don't write them as individual characters as much as I do as players in an ensemble cast who are working together and bounce off of each other. So it's a big process. It's a big process of writing. And so it's not that they're hard to write. It's sometimes they take some time to reveal themselves to me, like Alyssa did in The House Guest. I would have thought that she would have been the most obvious person to me, but she turned out to have layers and layers of fascinating complexity, which I was thrilled to discover.
I love that idea of helping a character to become the person they're meant to be or who they reveal themselves to be. I just love that concept as a writer. Hank, a question as to whether Flo or Eddie here.
Priya is so funny. You all know. If you don't know, this is hilarious, and I'll just take 1 second to tell you. We live in West Newton, Massachusetts, a sort of a suburb of Boston, and we have an old house from 1894, which has a swimming pool in the background, a kind of not glamorous swimming pool, which in the winter is covered with a green tarp, and the green tarp fills with snow and melting snow and ice and rainwater and all that. And in the spring, about this time of year, it looks like a pond, I guess, from above. And wild ducks come to our backyard pool, and they have for the past 23 years. just right around this time of year. And the first time I saw them 23 years ago, I looked out in the backyard and I said to my husband, Jonathan, sweetheart, the ducks are here. There are ducks. There are ducks in our backyard. Come look. And we named them, as Priya knows, we named them Flo and Eddie. I like the water flows and eddies. That's how they, not like the turtles singing group, but Flo and Eddie, like Flo and Eddie in water. Flo is the male and Eddie is the female. And they have come back every year, more than 2 ducks. Sometimes we have as many as 9 ducks. And it's mystical and mysterious because I don't know if a duck's lifespan is that long. And so they have exactly the same habits. I mean, they come to the back door and peck on the back door with their little beaks to get us to come out and feed them. How do they know to do that? And they've been doing that for 23 years. So we're expecting them any day now. But no, Priya, they're not quite here yet. But so we're crossing fingers that Flo and Eddie arrive as usual. Then we'll know the world is okay.
Everything is happening as usual. Thank you. The audience loves it. Thank you so much for answering these questions.
Isn't it so silly?
It's wonderful. It's fabulous. We are, believe it or not, we're beginning to run down on time. I could talk to the two of you all day. We need to, before we go, we're going to sell some books. And we are going to sell some books in particular in support of Indy Reads. The links are going to be in the chat. Obviously, people need to pick up a copy of The House Guest. But I'm going to ask both of you for your book recommendations as well. And Kat, you're the professional, so I'm going to go to you first. Tell us, what are you reading? What are you excited about? We're going to be dropping links in the chat to get these books from Indy Reads. Other Indiana independent booksellers are in the chat. Everybody in the audience, you know what to do. We're supporting independent booksellers. Kat, please tell us.
So we made a couple of selections. It is Women's History Month. So I thought kind of look at eyeing some female writers. One that I'm reading right now, it's a couple of years old, but it's excellent. The Lady from the Black Lagoon. Mallory actually goes back and finds the woman who created the creature. She's like the only woman who created any of the universal monsters. So, you know, Dracula, Wolfman, all those are created by a man, but there was a woman who created it and she really just didn't get the credit. And so she went back and did the history on it. And it's a fascinating read. She also just wrote Girly Drinks, which is like the history of alcohol and the women's involvement in it, which also, and so both books have been excellent. So I highly recommend this book. Oceanique, one of my booksellers here, she actually is reading a classic. So Toni Morrison's Sula, and is very much enjoying reading, you know, one of our, you know, ultimate, you know, great writers. Sometimes we forget about, so, you know, some of the ones that aren't brand new. So that was one of her recommendations. And then lastly, we actually are having Tamora here later this month. She is going to be here talking about some of her writing. And so wanted to spotlight one of our local authors here of The Sisters Are All Right.
The Sisters Are All Right. Fabulous. We're going to put those links in the chat. Those are great recommendations. Thank you. Hank, what about you? Books that you'd like to recommend to our audience?
So many. This is really difficult. So I just randomly picked some that I love because I know I'm leaving a million of them out. This was earlier, maybe last year, Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. Do you know this, Kat? It's amazing. It's about a woman who sees her teenage son murder someone. And then the next day she wakes up and it's the day before it happened. And then the next day she wakes up and it's the day before that happened. And yes, it's a murder mystery, but it's also this incredibly brilliant, poignant study of what it's like to be a parent and our responsibilities to our children and the things we don't notice that people do. And we think later, oh, if I had just seen that, if I had just remarked on that, if I had just taken the time to think about that, our lives would have been different. And I as a reader, it's fascinating. One of the best books I've read. As a writer, reading this as a writer, I kept thinking, how is she going to pull this off? You know, how is she going to do this? And she did it just gorgeously. Wrong Place, Wrong Time. A book coming up by Juan Gomez Jurado called Red Queen. He is. Do you know about this book?
I haven't read it.
It's translated from Spanish. It gorgeously translated, really beautifully. It's a story about a marvelous woman police detective who's on the trail of a terrifying serial killer, and there are other characters, and I don't even want to ruin it for you, but it's entertaining, it's complex, it's unique, it's brilliant, it's wry. I think this is going to be a huge book when it comes out pretty soon. Let me just see when it comes out. Well, you'll find it. Red Queen. It's the beginning of a series, and it's about to be a major motion picture as well. It's a #1 international bestseller. It just hasn't been out in the U.S., so it's coming out in the U.S. And 2 more, really fast. I just finished Lisa Jewell's new book. None of this is true. Lisa Jewell is a genius. She's my icon of psychological suspense novelist. This is about a woman. Talk about the class system. This is about a woman in the UK who starts a podcast about interesting women, and she picks just the wrong woman to be her interview subject. And it is a spiraling, terrifying psychological study with a twist around every corner, as only Lisa Jewell can do. I mean, look at the title. None of this is true. And that sets you up for what the book is going to be. And finally, our neighbor in Newton, William Landay, his new book, the author of Defending Jacob, after 10 years has come out with a new mystery, All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me. And I'm telling you, Bill Landay is amazing. Bill Landay and All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me. The story of a family where the wife goes missing. The father, the fancy criminal defense attorney, is the main suspect in her disappearance. And it's a story about trust and loyalty and family and secrets. And Bill Landay takes every rule of writing books and breaks them, and takes every rule of storytelling and just embraces it brilliantly. So again, it's called All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me. It's just out now. So highly recommended. 10 years after Defending Jacob. And it is just as good, if not better.
Oh my gosh, so many great books, so many fabulous books. Not enough time. Thank you so much for that. Kat, we always go out with a question for the bookseller, and I'm going to turn to you. Our final question, as is tradition, is success as an independent bookseller is part luck, part hard work, and part what third ingredient?
I thought about this, and there's a lot of things, but I'm going to go with listening. And really what that boils down to, there's only so much I can know. There's only so much interest that I have in certain subjects and certain books or certain, subject matters. And by listening to our students who are very diverse, listening to our volunteers, I get information and knowledge of, some things that we should have, that, may not have gotten a spotlight, or an amazing new author, or, a new genre that I haven't tried. So I would say really listening to others is part of the success.
What a great answer. I love that answer. And I think having spoken to so many independent bookstores over the last 3 years, I think it completely rings true. It has been a complete delight to speak to the two of you. Thank you both so much for joining us on the 128th episode of Authors Love Bookstores. Thankfully, Ryan, congratulations on the house guest. We cannot wait for book number 15 whenever we get it. I'm not going to push you. Kat Cardwell, thank you so much for joining us from Indy Reads in Indianapolis, Indiana, and the online audience. Please support Indy Reads and Indianapolis Independent Bookselling. You have all the links. You know what to do. There are more than enough great books to buy and to read. So go to work. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the audience for joining us. We are back on April 5th in Dallas, Texas. We will be at Deep Vellum Books with debut author Christine Bly. We cannot wait to join you then. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming then. Be well, and please keep reading.